What's up, everybody? We're back with another episode of IDENTECO After Dark, and 2/3 of us this week, we are coming to you live from Gamers Heaven in Seattle, which is our store. Ahsoka is sitting back here staring daggers at Joe right now. So, thank you all for joining us tonight. We've got a really fun rundown that I think is going to be a really interesting show today. We are joined this week by one of our great Chaos Inc. castmates. That would be Michael. Michael, how are you tonight?
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks, Alex. Joe, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you.
And because Joe decided, he texted me earlier, he was like, I'm going to be salted. And I was like, fine, Ahsoka will tell you. We'll just stare at you all night. So
I love that you can just see Ahsoka's eyes over the top of Joe's head. Like
There we go.
You could see her staring daggers at the back of his head.
it's perfect. It's perfect.
It really is.
So, thank you all for joining us tonight. So let's jump right in. And since we're at the game store, here's where I would like to start today. Let's talk some tabletop RPGs. So,
we never talk about
the
those.
big headline from this morning, for those that didn't know, Wizards of the Coast did not own D&D Beyond. They had licensed out to a company to create D&D Beyond
That was news to me.
for their players. This morning, it was announced that they have purchased D&D Beyond for, I believe it was just over $140 million. And that was the buy. So now Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro, obviously, over them, now owns D&D Beyond outright. I don't know that this changes much off the top of my head, but
They did say they weren't going to be making any changes.
I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on this one. Michael, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a move that makes complete sense if you are Wizards and trying to get a foothold in the VTT, environment, the virtual tabletop environment with your flagship product, because D&D Beyond has already done the work of converting 99% of your materials to a digital format that can be used in almost any virtual tabletop environment.
Now, do you use D&D Beyond?
I do.
What do
I've
you
used
think
it
of
I've used it for campaigns that I've run, as well as games I've been in on different streams and other online venues. I think it's a great product that could definitely still use some improvements. The web-based version of it runs pretty well, and it seems to be pretty browser friendly. I feel like the search functions in the online system could use some work. And I feel like they didn't. The homebrew integration is challenging, but they have some wonderful tools on there, like the encounter creator. I think works very well in a very basic sense. I think the reference materials are easily accessed on there, so I used it primarily to run two of the online campaigns I was running, and I used most of the materials available there to do most of my reference. I did use a VTT separately to run the miniatures side of the game, the maps side of the game, but everything else, for the most part, I did using D&D Beyond as a tool.
And I'm going to come back to that whole VTT thing for the miniatures and Beyond thing. Joe, have you used D&D Beyond at all?
Pretty much exclusively for my Dungeons and Dragons games. I find it's extremely robust in a lot of ways, and there are some minor issues that I have with it. I actually had a pretty terse exchange with their support once because of some issues.
No.
Yeah. But it makes
Color me surprised.
Yeah. It makes more sense now, because the issue at the time was that when you make a character sheet, they give you the little UI, and you can hover over stuff and it'll do a little fly-out tooltip of what the thing does or how to use it, kind of just a little brief synopsis of it. In that particular case, one of the powers, they put all the fluff text in the flyout, but none of the actual mechanics of how you're supposed to use it in the flyout. So I wrote to them and then basically asked them to, hey, maybe put the mechanics towards the top and then add the fluff. And they swore up and down that they couldn't do that. But it makes more sense now that they were not the actual official. They just had to use the licenses as the product as existed because of their license.
Yep.
So that makes more sense now, because at the time I did not know that it was run by Fandom. which I have my own separate issues with the fandom. But I really like D&D Beyond. Like Tip pointed out, it's way better than they're offering for 4th edition. I think it's been probably one of the best and most feature-rich virtual character sheet programs I've used to date. I really like some of their features, which honestly, it was a smart move on D&D's behalf, but the licensing on it was probably hell. But the ability for DMs to share their content if you're in a campaign with them without requiring your players to purchase was a huge plus. I think it could be better, but as first attempt at it, I think they did a great job.
So, does this signal, because you've got a lot of companies out there, you've got D&D Beyond, you've got Drive-Thru, which is another separate company, and they run the DM's Guild as well as Drive-Thru RPG. That's all run on by the same company. You've got Roll20, you've got the other VTTs. Do we think that Wizards is going to continue? Would Wizards continue down this acquisition road? And I'm going somewhere with this, but that's really the question that I have. Is
I think they would be dumb if they didn't,
from a business perspective.
Because
the
world's just getting more and more digital, and it's not going to stop becoming more and more digital. And I think there currently is and probably will be a time when buying hardback books for your game are not necessarily the primary source of income. I think they need to be investing in these tools now rather than trying to catch up later.
And so that statement right there brings me to my next piece. We all know that investing in these digital tools is expensive. It's things like that. Does D&D's proliferation of digital tools and going that all digital route, right, which they can afford to do, does that continue this trend where they basically get to control the industry? Period, full stop, right? Because none of the other major players, or very few of them, can afford to go that road, right? So if the trend is it's going to go all digital, right? Like we see it with video games where we're gradually shifting away from physical media, right? You're not buying CDs anymore. You're not buying discs for video games anymore. You're not owning that thing. Does the same thing happen with tabletop RPGs? And because it's such an expensive endeavor, does that hurt the rest of the industry? And I'm talking top to bottom, because then you know, this is a cost that every independent RPG producer's got to try and figure out how to bake in, because this is the expectation now, right? D&D sets the industry and what the expectation for that is. If you're creating a AAA book, players want glossy page, full color interior, nice art, which didn't used to be the case, right? Michael, you've been around, Joe, you've been around for a long time. You used to be able to buy paperback with black and white interior, which from a production cost standpoint is way, way, way less expensive than hardback glossy interior like we did with IDENTECO. And one of the reasons we did that with IDENTECO was, and we debated it for a long time, was because that's just the expectation now. And if the expectation becomes, no, you have to have a digital tool set to be able to compete in this industry, does that continue to whittle away at the indie creators and their ability to get any level of market share, which is small enough as it is?
If it's all about ease of presentation to your potential audience, right?
Right.
And the easier you can make the adoption of your system for the potential new player, I mean, the better off you are in general. And Wizards is in a position with purchasing D&D Beyond. Well, Wizards is in a position, of course, of power to start with.
Yep.
And everything that they do moving forward in this digital framework is going to be done to increase the ease of access for its audience, right? And that's something that I don't think is going to change. When you look at it from a sea change top to bottom, it's just this is going to be the expectation. I think it's something that has happened in due partly because of the pandemic. I think really pushed the pandemic pushed hard in a lot of ways this digital growth because suddenly, in-person games became very difficult to run
Yeah.
or impossible
do.
to run.
Yep.
And that being the case, like those, it's just like restaurants, right? In restaurant terms, the places that survived are the ones that could make that very quick shift to doing delivery and takeout options and change their offerings to make things more cost effective for them to run with a smaller staff. Like similarly, like making that change for independent publishers is going to be just as crucial. Being able to pivot quickly into a digital marketplace and put those assets maybe less toward the production of the physical book and shift those resources more toward finding some kind of way to make a digital tool work.
Just digital
It's
only.
going to have to be baked into the into those initial costs. Is having a digital tool set that can launch with what we're doing.
Right.
I think that's you're very close to the mark on that. Is just you're going to see less emphasis on physical media and more emphasis on digital. And realistically speaking, the internet is just chock full of like stories of businesses that started out in someone's garage and ended up becoming massive empires because someone had the dedication to write the tools that they needed. I mean, literally Amazon. That's the story of Amazon. And that was done at a time when internet was just developing. We're getting an age where they're already working on AI capability to write coding for websites for you. Like, you've got...
Yeah, and I just, my biggest concern is how do the smaller publishers compete? Because this is not inexpensive, right? And in a lot of ways, creating a digital tool set,
I think the price is going to go down.
Even half as good as D&D Beyond is out of reach for most independent publishers. Period. Full stop.
I really don't think
for sure.
it is. I don't think it is. If you get the right team using the right technologies, I mean, a small plucky group of web coders could make something just like D&D Beyond.
And that brings me to kind of like how I want to pivot. And this kind of leads into our second topic here, is for as many plucky tabletop RPG developers as are out there in the world, right, us included, no one, and I mean no one, has been able to crack the code of getting even 5%. And let me be clear for the audience and for people like that. Like I've spent a lot of time looking for data. The tabletop RPG industry, more so than any other aspect of the entertainment industry, is more opaque than any other industry out there. Period. Just full stop. You cannot find solid numbers, right? Even when you talk about D&D Beyond, where they put out their press release, they were like, nearly 10 million users. Okay, what percentage of that are your free users? What percentage of that are your paying users? Paying the $6 a month? Like, what is the drive on D&D Beyond? And they didn't put that number out, and they're not going to.
They won't.
That being said, nobody's managed to crack that code. And if you're making it even harder, what does that do to the rest of the industry? Are we going to get to the point where we're going to Amazon this up, where there's going to be
I don't think so.
D&D, and they're the Amazon of tabletop RPGs?
Oh, but they already are.
Well, largely.
Arguably.
And is it just going to make it worse?
No, I don't think it will, because some YouTubers and stuff I watch that know a lot more about it than I do have commented how we are actually living in the golden age of alternate games to Dungeons and Dragons.
And I would say that those people are full of crap.
There are literally thousands of them being published all the time.
There are thousands being published, and that's the problem. But half of them are flashes in the pan. They get published, they're there, and then they're gone.
That's fine.
It's not fine for the people that want to make a living doing the job.
No. Well, here's the thing. So I'll come at this from a slightly different angle. I come from a group that created a podcast to try to compete with larger, podcasts out there to try to kind of make our own footprint. And the podcast industry is as cottage as it gets, right? There are millions of podcasts out there, and there are less than 0.2% of the podcasts that exist anyone knows the name of, right? There are very few household name podcasts, right? That's just
that was
nature
going to
of
be
it.
part of what my discussion tonight was.
And so I think when you look at it in those terms, the role-playing game industry, like Joe said, right now, it is a golden age of things that are available, right? The amount of material that's available and things that are out there for people to find out about is amazing. The width and breadth of the types of games that are out there and the content that's out there is incredible. But that doesn't change the fact that people are still beholden to a mass market that is primarily concentrated on revenue stream, like advertising revenue streams, brick and mortar marketplaces. And even though we are in this digital revolution, a large portion of that business existed prior to this explosion.
So
Dungeons, like Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons and Dragons as that particular brand has existed almost, I won't say exclusively, but in name and in known name since the late 70s.
Yes,
I mean, growing up, I never heard of anything other than Star Wars RPG and Dungeons and Dragons. That was it.
Yeah, I mean, so when you look at the marketplace when you're looking at it historically, it's not like Wizards of the Coast came out 5 years ago or 10 years ago and like this blew up. Like, this has been something that's been on a very slow burn for 30 plus years, and only in the last 10 years has it. Yeah. Well, but only in the last 10 years has Wizards really blown up to the extent that it is now with Dungeons and Dragons specifically. Like, of course they had Magic before that, but with D&D, like, it's been like the last decade that it's been in the forefront.
Honestly, I think that's also largely due to shows like Critical Role and some of those other ones that are out there that got huge outside of the normal nerd markets.
And stuff like Big Bang Theory and stuff like Stranger Things. Like, these are all mass market properties that use Dungeons and Dragons as their gateway to.
And I'm with you. My bigger thing is this: is that, like, going back to like people in the industry that I've met or that I talked to, right? The rough estimate. Like, and these are people, these are industry people. The rough estimate of the number of people who make a full-time living writing RPGs is less than 200. Right? Because
I mean, that checks out in like my basic goat math. That checks out,
So, but for a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? There is some serious. There is a lot of people, like we're saying, we have a lot of people, and there's been a lot of discussion about this online. There's a lot of people who are putting out good product and things like that, but freelancers get paid garbage because the only 2-3 companies that can afford to pay freelancers don't, right? And everybody else is like basically fighting for the scraps of what's left in the industry because there's no way. Or it's extremely difficult to break through. And again, like I said, my thing is from an industry perspective, does this continue to cement D&D's dominance in the industry and make it harder for other people to break through? Harder than it is now.
I don't think it's so much going to cement. There we go. Words are hard. D&D's dominance.
It's
because
Ahsoka's pulling a Jedi mind trick on you.
Because let's be honest, D&D's already dominant.
Right, I'm saying, is it going to make it work? If
D&D
D&D has 92% of the market share right now,
because it's the household name,
right? Will it go to 97 now? Because
Probably.
You just can't compete.
Honestly, I think D&D will probably be in a few years. D&D will probably be the vast majority of this people who are into this kind of game. It'll be their first experience. Just like, a lot of kids go to McDonald's for their first hamburger.
So that's where I'll come back to the story, because I talk to a lot of people. And I think Wizards and some of the other ones are, to a certain degree, cutting off their nose to spite their face. I talk to a lot of people. And a lot of people don't have any desire to play Tolkien-esque fantasy. They just don't. They don't want to.
That's not what they want to play. I mean,
right.
let's be honest.
But hang on,
these
are people who've never played tabletop RPGs, and we're trying to get them into this. But when D&D is the most accessible and the only one that's consistently around, like I think we're leaving customers on the table that would come into this hobby, into this
I
industry.
think it's up to the community and the stores to start pushing people.
And
into
the thing
something
is, and
else.
that brings to this: if D&D Beyond becomes the default going forward,
I would
right?
argue it already has been.
Right, but I'm saying like this: the stores are just going to stop carrying D&D and all the other ones because they can't, like, they don't get any money from D&D Beyond, right?
I think that's where the digital aspect comes in.
The stores aren't there.
No.
There's
The stores are not making profit off of telling people to go, buy something from another, online retailer. They're not going to make money off of that. But they can make money off the peripherals, like you guys are doing here, setting up a table to have people come in and buy, boba and stuff to play Identico.
yeah.
I think a very good analogy of what I'm trying to hit at is Reddit. Reddit's a social media platform. It's not the only social media platform, and if you go to it, if you don't ever bother trying to scratch below the surface, you're going to get fed just the same old drivel that everyone gets fed. But if you actually scratch below the surface, you'll find there's huge and vibrant communities that never really make it to the front page. And it's up to other people to drag people to those areas. And yeah, D&D is going to be dominant for a long time, and it's going to take a major catastrophe to get them to not be dominant. But I don't think they're going to necessarily be the only thing going forward.
I think whoa.
Earthquake. No, kidding.
I think what you're going to see is, especially in regards to this, this move to digital, that they are starting to make their steps with. This was a no-brainer for Wizards because it was literally just spending money to get the resources that somebody already put money and time into, right?
Right.
The D&D Beyond had already done all the work for them. All they had to do was pay them for what they'd already done.
Right.
And at this point, Wizards now has no viable excuse to not include digital product in the print product, right? To offer a book and offer you a digital code for the same product on D&D Beyond, or to vice versa, continue to just sell product on D&D Beyond.
And so if they were to do that, and I talked to a lot of people where they're like, so there's a subset of the gaming community who does both, right? Who is like, I'm going to, I'm going to buy my physical books and then I just knuckle under and buy them on D&D Beyond because I want to do that, right? Yeah. There's a larger and growing subset of the community that, and this is where I start to get frustrated, where they buy it on D&D Beyond only, right? Mm-hmm. And then expect more support from stores and other aspects of the community that they're not supporting. Does that make sense?
That's a valid complaint, and
that's not even. And it's just an observation. They're just this is what's happening right now.
When you say expect more, can you be a little more concrete about like what those expectations are? As a store owner, and as someone active in that community of, I'm sure, independent store owners, like what type of things? The
expectation really is, and again, this is where I think that more stores will probably go closer to our model, right? Where they expect, like, so we charge for play space, right? Mm-hmm. Like, there is a cover charge to play, period, right? And that's either covered with cash on the barrelhead or it's covered with points, right? The level of pushback for that, right? It's not been huge, but it does exist, right? Mm-hmm. Where there are people who are like, you should just be providing me with a space to come do this. But you're not supporting the space. It's well, yeah. It's really difficult.
That's also coming from, again, if you've got people who buy on D&D Beyond, or they are coming into your space and expecting use for free without any other benefit other than just being in the store. Mm-hmm. It's not like they don't have to buy something to sit and play.
So I will say this. So I will say support for D&D in stores, if D&D keeps going down this road, will probably decrease. They just won't support it. They'll just be like, we're not going to carry it because we can't. There's a couple other game publishers, and less so.
I don't know. I don't know that you're going to see that, because at the end of the
Here's
day,
the thing.
if
go,
D&D is still, if they're still
it's
the
already
premier,
happening. So like the biggest board game store in Seattle, the biggest tabletop store in Seattle, there. If I went there right now, there's maybe 15 Dungeons and Dragons books on every shelf. It's the largest store in Seattle. And the reason is they've shifted away from it. They carry far more in the way of board games and miniature games and things that you can't play at home, because nobody's cracked that code yet.
I would be interested. Now, this is something that maybe as an older store owner would know. I would be interested, because even before the digital model took off, back when it was just a twinkle in everybody's eye and we're on like 2nd and 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons, how many people actually bought books out of a group? Because typically, in my experience, it was almost always just the DM.
So for pretty much every group, and Michael, I'd let you hear this. So the analogy that I use for people when I talk about what we see in the market is, if I've got a group of 5 tabletop role players, right, and they're all playing D&D, all of them buy the player's handbook because they all want their own copy, so they have their own reference copy of the PHB.
That wasn't our group. Our group
right?
was always cheap.
Okay, so most of them are going to buy the PHB, right? 2 of the people in that group are going to buy the Monster Manual, because there's the one guy in the group that wants to have every book, and that guy's going to buy everything, and then the DM's going to buy everything, right? That's, again, the same reason why they're going to that 5.5 edition. They want that sweet PHB money again, because the fact of the matter is when they release an adventure pad, like a campaign setting like Curse of Strahd or something like that, they sell 1 for every group of 5.
That's
right?
what I'm concerned about.
Well, and that's where they are.
Adopting the Call of Duty model, where they got to release a new version every year.
they're gonna have DLC.
Yeah.
So, kind of shifting off this a little bit, Michael, since you do a podcast, and again, I've talked to a bunch of podcasters, and I'd be curious if you're hearing the same thing. Most streamers and podcasters I speak to, I go, hey, why don't you do stuff besides D&D? They said, we've tried. But here's the problem. We've got a solid audience, and these are ones with solid audiences. Not huge, not like Crit Roll huge, but decent, right? And they're like, our view rate on YouTube and on Twitch for anything non-D&D related is 20% of D&D.
Right now.
Right? Like, if we run a D&D campaign, it is what it is. Now, you do a non-D&D. Why don't you go ahead and plug your podcast while we're here? Because you got your, did you get your YouTube? Did you get your custom URL yet?
I haven't talked to Kaylee. I'm sure that's in the works this week if she hasn't already done it. But I'm a member of the podcast, the Redemption podcast. It's a Star Wars actual play using the FFG Edge of the Empire system. It takes place just after the Clone Wars, and we are in our 7th season, approaching our 8th. So there's a lot to listen to. It's redemptionpodcast.com, or you can find us on any major podcatcher, a podcast system at Redemption. You can find us there as well. So we have always had a small but dedicated audience of listeners. Probably at our peak, which was a couple of years ago, we were averaging anywhere from, I think, 25 to 3,000 downloads a month.
Okay.
That's
pretty good.
Well, I mean, we had months, depending on how things were going for us and how hard we hit marketing. We had months where we would hit, close to 5.
Wow. That's solid numbers.
But at the end of the day, it's still you are running. We're in Star Wars, so we're it's not like we are in a niche that people don't know about.
That's true.
And I would be willing to bet that the majority of the biggest months we had were probably when the movies were coming out, and again, Star Wars was kind of on everybody's mind.
Yeah.
That being said, just like with any independent product, there is a challenge to get eyes, to get ears, and to get market share. And there is no tried and true formula for the independent to grow. Is you can put your blood, sweat, and tears into this for years and get almost no traction. And, someone doing the almost exact same thing as you just happens to fall into the ears of a person who has a lot more, clout or sway or audience or what have you. And suddenly that show takes off and your show doesn't. And the only difference is that one person heard it and like put it out there for more people. Like there's no formula.
Yeah.
And so when you look at it in those terms, like I look at the listenership that we've built, again, kind of by hand, blood, sweat, and tears, and I'm very proud of that. But at the end of the day, I'm under no illusions that our show will ever be anything that is at, say, Critical Role level.
I was going to ask, do you think that outside of the D&D ecosystem, do you think that it would be theoretically possible? Do you think it's possible for a show to hit? Because, I mean, there's probably, 2-3 shows that are anywhere in that, like, Critical Role, Acquisitions Incorporated. I don't know of anybody who's even close to those numbers. And this is, again, where I go, tabletop RPGs are so different than the rest of the entertainment industry. Because...
But they are, but they're not. Because, again, we're talking about 2 shows. Like, well, if we talk Acquisitions Inc. and we talk Critical Role, right? In both cases, both shows were initially picked up and put out by media companies, right? Mm-hmm. Penny Arcade did Acquisitions Inc.
Yep.
And Penny Arcade is very well known.
Yep, they run PAX. Yep.
Very
Mallo
well known.
Likes to say with Critical Role, it's not Dungeons and Dragons; it's a television show.
Yeah,
and it has all the marketing machine behind it that a television show does.
Well, and Critical Role, if I recall, came on as part of Geek and Sundry's initial offerings, mm-hmm. right? Like they were initially put on by Geek and Sundry, who again a funded by or put together by a known personality in the industry.
Mm-hmm. Several.
Again, so by several. So you've got 2 examples of products that are already like primed for success before they even hit the table.
So basically what you're saying is you need that behind you.
You either need that level of support out of the gate. Like, again, it's like spend money to make money, right? That's like the golden rule of capitalism, right? Yep. If you want to build something successful, you have to be able to invest in it at the start. And I would say this, and I don't say this to be rude or to be a downer, but I mean, most people out there that are doing this because they love it aren't going to get that opportunity to get in front of as many people and build the brand that way. If you build a brand that way, it's over time. If you're lucky enough to build a brand that way, it's over time and it's by word of mouth. And like that's the quality of your product ends up speaking for you and the experiences of people that play your product.
Yeah.
Versus having a bunch of big names on a very public forum playing your product.
Got it.
When we were growing up, everybody wanted to be a rock star, or they want to go to Hollywood and be the latest actor. Now it's being the YouTuber or the Twitch sensation.
So and
you have to have the same level of luck.
But this is where I disagree, in that there is a stratification in YouTube, right?
Yes,
where you've got the media, but hang on, you got the Mr. Beast types, right? But then you've got like Mr. Beast. Then you've got like the Philip DeFrancos, which are like here, right? Then you've got the ones that like, and I know a bunch of like, you've got YouTubers who can not just eke out, but they're not millionaires, but they're like, look, I do well enough where I make like 85, 90,000 a year. I survive. I'm good. I'm happy. There is a middle ground there in that ecosystem that you can inhabit. I don't see that anywhere in tabletop RPGs or related projects. There doesn't seem to be, and I guess that's kind of like where we can kind of wrap this topic up, is I don't really see there's no middle class basically in tabletop.
I don't think there's any middle class anywhere in YouTube or Twitch.
Well,
there is in YouTube.
I'll drop this in just as kind of a side note or maybe an addendum to this. When you talk about tabletop role-playing game and publishing, as well as as you well know, another big part of that game is distribution.
Oh yeah. Oh, don't get me started on the distributors.
Well, so when you talk about like self-publishing, whether it's a novel or whether it is a tabletop role-playing game or any like a board game or what have you, getting that product in front of people,
It's hard.
you know, it's difficult getting a group to back you and a group to represent you, and then also a group to distribute you are also part of those keys to hitting that next level, being able to get in front of people and being able to, you know,
Oh yeah, no, I hear you.
build your product. So like there are a number of different levels that fall far outside of, you know, in the publishing game, I would say.
So,
you know, in tabletop role-playing publishing, outside of the social media and the basic audience level for your product.
So, to pivot off of that, and this all Dungeons and Dragons, things like that. Another thing we talked about in our rundown. So the Dark Souls tabletop RPG just released, and people are unhappy. The number one reason this kind of goes into something. I was talking to a kid yesterday. I actually gave him a different game. It wasn't Identico, because he was like, I'm looking for this thing and I want to do this, and my D&D's not. I'm like, D&D's not the be all end all. You have to branch out. And I gave him a different game, and he's like, oh, this is exactly what I'm looking for. There you go. But they wrote Dark Souls in the 5e OGL style, and people are not happy about it.
No. People, I mean, the critical reaction happened before the product even, you know, came to par. As soon as people found out they were doing it in 5e, there was a large uproar about people basically saying 5e is the wrong engine for Dark Souls.
And it is
totally wrong. They were like, people were suggesting Savage Worlds. They were suggesting, you know, Powered by the Apocalypse, like many different systems.
Yeah.
You know, to be able to do this that are, you know, shine in different ways than D&D or than D&D 5e. But sorry, go ahead, Joe.
I'm not certain. This is just me being a cantankerous old man, I think. But
you?
Yeah.
Ahsoka's glaring at you again.
I think a lot of people get, and I know this is very rich coming from me, a lot of people get too butthurt about things these days when it comes to stuff like this. The entire point of Dungeons & Dragons and the 5e system and like literally every single role-playing game that I have ever played has been you can use the rule system however you want to make it as lethal or as safe or teddy bear huggy as you want.
D&D 5e doesn't do that as well.
That does, if you go as rules as written in the page and never expand beyond that, it's kind of on you for having a terrible time.
No, and that's what I'm saying is I think a lot of people expected more out of it, and that there might have been a better engine for it.
I mean, if it works and it does what the devs set out to do, who cares? If you don't enjoy the game, don't play it.
So, I think a lot of people get upset because a lot of people like Dark Souls. And a lot of people were looking forward to a Dark Souls-esque tabletop role-playing game that felt more deadly. That was that very, like, let's get killed, right?
Don't make it deadly.
And apparently it's not working well to do that.
Well, there seems to be a number of issues, and I did a little bit of reading on this, you know, to prime myself. I had heard the initial debacle when they announced the game, and people kind of like were poo-pooing the 5e stuff, and it kind of rolled off my back because the Souls games in general are not really my bag.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not necessarily the play, die, repeat type of person anymore that I used to be when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Out of necessity, because guess what? You couldn't play DuckTales and just hit a save point and continue your game. You know,
Battletoads.
Like Battletoads, you started over. That was
arcade
you died.
games
Boom. Guess
to
what?
Screw you over to get your quarters.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
But that being said, that type of game typically isn't my bag anyway. So like a Dark Souls experience at a gaming table for me would be like a novelty one shot. It's not a system I would buy.
Uh-huh.
But in reading about this, it seems as though the majority of the people complaining, or that are the majority of the complaints I've seen on the Reddit, were honestly about what seems to be a lack of playtesting of the system, of the rule set that they built, and like real basic editing stuff, like send this through a couple passes through like an editor, and let them tell you that, hey, these things don't make sense, or like your playtesters might tell you that, hey, guess what? The class you recommended for the cleric actually can't be a cleric because they don't have the strength to wield the weapon. Like, things that you would catch in oversight. The other thing I read a little bit about was that it sounded like the playtesting was all done internally. They didn't go outside, or they didn't have an outside company or outside source for the playtesting.
It's hard to do external playtesting.
But that being said, the people that built the game shouldn't be the one playtesting your game, because they know what they intended versus what they wrote, and versus what is being interpreted by somebody who's not familiar with the system.
It's why we did so many public playtests when we wrote Identico, over and over.
Well, and
sorry, Joe. Go ahead, Joe.
One thing that bothers me, because this is definitely not the first time I've seen the current D20 rule set, because there was the D20 rule set that was kind of like a generic version of 3rd edition as well.
It's the same thing.
But at any rate, it kind of bothers me a lot of times, because Dungeons & Dragons has gotten popular, especially in the time frame we're talking about here, because it's accessible. The rules are relatively easy to understand. It's easy to sit down and explain it to somebody in 30 minutes to an hour while you're making a character. It works. I don't think people should be getting upset because people are choosing to use a system that works and makes their stuff accessible, because we've all seen Shadowrun, and its original stuff was very difficult to understand.
And that's gonna swing us around to our next topic, the Marvel RPG. So there is a Marvel tabletop RPG, the head designer of which appears to be somebody who left Pinnacle, which they designed Savage Worlds and a bunch of that stuff back in the day. I took some glances at their preview and was like, this looks interesting.
I'm going to give it a hard pass.
Joe, why are you giving it a hard pass?
I like Marvel, but in my experience, no superhero game, tabletop, RPG, video game has ever been fun. They've all kind of sucked in their own way, because realistically speaking, superheroes are fun to watch doing things, but being a superhero is actually kind of boring in a lot of cases. The one exception to that is the SpiderMan video game that came out for PS4 a few years ago. That one was fun.
Yeah.
But I think that was more because they really nailed the web slinging rather than anything else.
That's facts.
But I'm not interested in it. I don't think it's going to be interesting. I think as nerdy as Dungeons and Dragons is, mixing something like Dungeons and Dragons with comic book nerds is you're going to be spending the entire time with people pushing their glasses up their nose and rules lawyering the whole time about it. It's just not going to be enjoyable.
So, Michael, what are your thoughts? What's your initial impression based on the previews they've shown and the kind of the interview that they did with Holbrook?
So, the preview they've shown, the interview I read, I feel like they're at this weird spot, because I feel like they want to tell a storytelling game, and the way that he describes the game makes it sound like he wants a storytelling game, but the character sheet I looked at looked like a crunchy game.
And did you see the skill, like the skill tree system?
Yeah, the skill tree. I was like, okay, so apparently so the skill tree system actually threw me back to the TSR system of their way they did the way they did power rankings for TSR. In that old game, in the Marvel superhero system. And while it was worked in theory, in game it didn't work, because you'd always wanted to do shit that you always wanted to do things with your character that you couldn't do because your power level didn't allow it.
Right.
It's not because and again, this kind of goes back to what Joe was saying about, kind of playing rules as written versus, like the spirit of the rules, right? Well, back when the TSR game came out, it was more rules as written. The storytelling side of things hadn't really pushed forward as much as it is today, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot more. It's a lot more acceptable nowadays to just kind of use the rules as guidelines versus this is what you can and can't do.
Right.
And when I looked at that new character sheet for this new game, and I looked at the Spider-Man web swinging powers, the first thing I thought was, this should be a power called web shooters, and that's it. Because everything else that it's like web climbing, web grabbing, web climbing, web, it's like I shouldn't have to. if I can use the web shooters as a player, right? If I know how the web shooters work, then it's up to me to creatively use those web shooters to do cool shit.
So, I'm with you on a couple. So first, I want to say this: Dark Souls, you tried to just crib 5e and turn it a thing. I mean, credit to them for trying to do something different, and I'm glad they didn't just like 5e the snot out of it. So that's good. That being said, I got the same impression that you did, where it was like, we want this to be a storytelling game, but then we made it really crunchy, and I'm like. And then the whole dice mechanic system apparently rolls around 3d6, where one of them is the Marvel die, right? Mm-hmm. And if you do a 6-1-6, that's the best roll you can get, right? Like that's like a super critical roll because Marvel 6-1-6, right? And they're like, and apparently there's going to be options for creating your own characters or playing variants essentially of classic comic Iron Man, SpiderMan, Captain America. I personally, now here's the thing. I've played some superhero games that were a blast, but they weren't the actual. So I've played both the Marvel and the DC ones that were released back in the day, and they were both bad.
City of Heroes.
And City of Heroes was pretty good. Heroes Unlimited by Palladium was pretty good. You can play a fun superhero game. There's one out now that some of my customers here at the store, they're trying to work up a campaign for called Masks, right?
Yeah, Masks. I believe it's Masks. The Next Generation is the current.
Yep.
The current version.
Yep. And so, and I'm all for it. I just don't know. So a couple things. Again, I kind of get the same impression as you. They were like, we want to do storytelling, but then we went crunchy. And I'm like, okay. Also, there's the discussion of IP. I mean, I've got the Dune RPG sitting on my shelf right now. That thing doesn't sell. And Dune's big, right? It's that book right there, right? People look at it, and they're like, I mean, same thing, like, there's been Lord of the Rings RPGs. Mm-hmm. They've always been kind of midland. They've never been top tier. I think the only, like, previously existing IP that's been consistently good with having an RPG out there that was reasonably popular is Star Wars, right? Everything else seems to kind of flop. Would you all agree with that statement?
Yes, and while you were talking about that, the first thought that came to my mind about that is I honestly think, in my mind, and this may be just total horseshit, but in my mind, I kind of feel that's because a lot of these, their scope is too narrow. Like, How do you mean? Like, for example, Dune. I haven't looked at the rule book, so I'm not 100% certain what it covers, but I doubt it covers much beyond Arrakis. Lord of the Rings, you pretty much are only in two choices. You're going to be in the Lord of the Rings period.
The Third Age,
already
right?
Covered.
Right.
Or you're going to be in the pre-Lord of the Rings stuff, kind of a Silmarillion, kind of somewhere vaguely.
When they're getting ready to defeat the Sauron the first time.
Which you're probably going to have to make up a ton of material in for that anyway, because it doesn't exist, so why don't you just play Dungeons & Dragons?
Fair.
In Star Wars, despite being a single topic, they were very big in all of the versions of it I've seen, saying this is a huge galaxy with billions of planets. You can do whatever you want. Most of them give you tips on how to design planets and stuff like that to design your adventures and make them basically. I mean, you could straight up do Dungeons and Dragons in Star Wars if you wanted to. You have them crash land on a primitive planet.
So somebody brought up.
I can say, speaking as someone who has actually played Dungeons and Dragons 5e within the Star Wars the FFG Edge of the Empire system, we did a meta game where our characters played D&D.
Nice.
That
Love
was nutty, but it's certainly possible.
So couple things. Somebody in the chat brought up 5e Doctor Who's coming next year, and I'm just shaking my head at that because,
well,
really, like
I've got the current version of Doctor Who, and again, it's too narrow.
And so this is why I'm like, why are we?
Well, like.
Same engine that runs Dune also currently runs Conan, Star Trek, John Carter, and Fallout. I haven't played it.
I'll just say what I was about to type out to Tip, which was that to agree, the 2D20 system actually flows between all those properties very well. because in each case they take the thing that is unique to that property and highlight that using the 2d20 system.
So you think it plays pretty well?
I really do. And versus something like 5e, where it feels oftentimes like they are taking this framework and this IP and trying to jam it into a 5e rule set. The 2d20 rule set, Modifius has done a very good job of saying, okay, what about Dune would work best? Like, what aspects of Dune would work best with this system?
Yeah.
Let's focus on those aspects, and everything else will kind of build in around it. And I think that's why it works so well across so many different IPs. But good point, Tip.
I am always very suspicious of licensed, again, RPGs aside from Star Wars. Now, here's the thing. And this is the other thing that had people in consternation, and I'm kind of back and forth on it. So Marvel, as far as I understand this, Marvel is publishing this themselves, right? Mm-hmm. Using the design team they recruited to do this. Now, they are doing actually what Fantasy Flight did for the last Star Wars game. I think next week, the 120-page beta comes out, and you can get it for $9.99 digital, mm-hmm. right?
Paid playtesting.
Right. And when the beta, and in fact, I have this book on my shelf at my house. I was at Gen Con when the Edge of Empire book was announced, and they also announced that you could buy the beta playtest book for $40. That was how much the beta playtest for Edge of Empire cost. And I bought it because I love Star Wars, and I immediately was like, oh, custom dice system. I have to buy different dice. I can't just use my dice, right? Which, by the way, the fastest way to get me to put a book down is to say, you must have these dice. And in fact, in the Edge of Empire beta book, they gave you stickers to put on your D8s.
I will
so that you can play the game. And I was like, why?
I will say, and this is not a dig at you or anything, I hated the Edge of Empire system. I tried playing it and I forget what it was called, but there was like kind of a generic cyberpunky version of it.
So they've used that system actually for a few games.
Genesis,
that's the Genesis system. Michael, what is your thoughts on the Edge of Empire system? I'm actually curious. Compared to previous Star Wars editions.
I have no experience. Actually, I have no experience with the D20 Saga system.
Okay. So there was two D20 systems, three D20 systems. So
I have no experience with the D20 Saga system. My previous Star Wars experience was with the WEG system, with the D6.
Yeah.
And personally, I would put both of them on equal footing.
Really?
I had the D6 was my introduction to Star Wars role playing, and I absolutely loved it. And I had some great adventures in that system. The West End game system is responsible for so much of the world building that was done in Star Wars that they used. Writing moving forward.
It made the it was the original canon Bible for the novels.
Yep. I still love this.
Yeah. Oh no. Here's the thing. I
lost audio. Just a second. That's weird.
Oh. Uh-oh. I can hear you still. For the audience, I will die on that hill. Can you hear me?
That being said, I love the FFG system because I like its cinematic nature. I enjoyed the way the skill trees worked. We've had a great time using it for storytelling for the last 6.5, 7 years.
God, it's been out that long, hasn't it?
It's been out for a while.
I have extensive experience with that system, and
I
enjoy it thoroughly. But again, that's just me.
Is Fantasy Flight still supporting it? Can you hear us? I don't think you can hear us. I can hear you, but you can't hear us.
So just so you know, Alex, I can't hear you guys right now.
Yeah,
and I think it's on my end.
I don't know.
Just a sec.
Well, and to continue this topic while I fix this stuff, I think his talks about the Fantasy Flight versions, I personally kind of feel is very indicative of how the lesser known RPGs are going to go in the future. They're kind of a niche group, and it's going to have its niche groups that really just love the hell out of it.
Yeah.
And those niche groups may be big enough to support the product line over the long term. I don't know.
Right.
But I think you're always going to have big players and small players. I don't think they're like you're talking about YouTube. I don't think there's going to be a middle ground. The one exception to that currently may be Paizo in Pathfinder.
That's probably the closest to that.
Like, if you kind of look at it, though, anybody who's played Dungeons and Dragons for any real amount of time will probably at least be aware that Pathfinder exists, even if they've never played it.
Yeah, I mean, Pathfinder's definitely got its proponents. Pathfinder's got its plays, and you know, again, it has its spot, and I don't even think it's a bad thing. I just worry about stuff like there. Michael, can you hear us now? Yeah, I don't think he can hear us now. Hello?
Tip suggested a tech break.
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Now we're back. Yay! All right, good deal. We were just vamping on about Star Wars.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, I can hear you. You can hear me.
We're good. We got it. So again, does Fantasy Flight still support it? Are they still putting out new books for Edge of Empire?
So, hold on just a second.
No, he lost us again. This is fun.
Edge Studios is now, and so I'm on a delay right now. I'm
weird.
hearing you through Twitch and not through Discord,
Ah.
so it's wonky. Give me
that's wonky.
again, a tech break would be great for me to figure this out.
Okay, let me see if I have a BRB screen. Stand by 1 minute, folks. We will be right back. All right. We're going to come back now. Michael needs to turn his camera on, though. Although we love his pretty Duros face. Joe will be right back. He had to take a quick break. But is Fantasy Flight still supporting the game?
So Fantasy Flight sold the game to Edge Studios.
But as Edge, so we saw this with the Star Wars stuff with X-Wing, where they transferred it studios, but both studios were owned by Asmodee.
Yeah, so Edge Studios now owns and publishes Star Wars. That they have that license, and Edge Studios just announced that books and dice are starting to become available again. I don't know that they are good. I don't know if they have new supplements on the way for the system, but they are beginning the process of publishing, republishing existing books.
Okay,
and
I'm gonna have to
making
take a
the
look at
dice
that.
available.
I'm gonna
I
have to
don't know
look
if
at that
was more of
again.
an industry-wide thing because BattleTech just did the same thing with their main rule book.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think
It had been out of print for like a year, and then they just started re-releasing it.
Yep. We should just ordered a bunch today. Yeah, I go back to West End games. I will die on this hill, and Joe and Mallo have heard me say it a million times. In my opinion, the West End game Star Wars, if you have somebody who's never played a tabletop role-playing game ever in their lives, it is the best system to introduce them to. It is remarkably simple, and the one thing you're taking off yourself if you're introducing a new tabletop role player is you're taking off that heavy lift of the descriptions. Because if you live on planet Earth, right, chances are you know what a Wookiee is, and you know what a Stormtrooper is, and so if I say you walk into a cantina and you see a squad of Stormtroopers, I don't have to explain to you what that is, which takes that heavy lift as somebody's trying to introduce that. It allows the new player's immersion to be better, and the system is just so simple and basic that anybody can pick it up. So
It was also a brilliant move at the time because when it came out, like Dungeons and Dragons, it was around and it was definitely popular, but I don't think I saw my first traditional Dungeons and Dragons dice set until I was already an adult. And
Alex,
D6,
if you could do me a favor, push your
Yeah.
mic back out a little because Joe's
about
not
that.
being picked up on his mic.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good. We're good. Sorry about that.
There you
Yeah,
go.
Joe's being picked up on your mic.
Yep.
So, yeah, being able to just go raid your board game closet for some D6s
Yep.
was a brilliant move.
Yep.
Yeah.
Plus, way better use of D6s than Risk or Monopoly.
And again, WEG West End did a very good job of saying, here's the core rule book, here's everything you need to play. And now, if you like the core rule book, here are literally like 75 different expansions of the Star Wars universe.
Oh, yeah.
There's the Return of the Jedi source book. Here's the New Command source book, or the Last Command source book. Like, you like that novel? Here, we made it a source book. You like that Dark Empire graphic novel? We made it a source book.
Yep. And I actually still own a bunch of those source books.
So do I.
Because I still love the West. They actually did a reprint. Oh, we lost Michael again.
The very first role-playing book I ever bought with my own money for my own job was the Kraken's Rebel Threat Dossier.
Oh, nice. Oh, wait, he went to go get it. He's got the
second
original.
one I ever bought was
Nice.
the Rebel Alliance source book, and I specifically bought the copy that I had.
That is my original.
Because my Rebel Alliance one, the pages are upside down. The thing I put in backwards.
Fantasy Flight did a re-release of the old West End Games system.
Yeah. Yep, they
a few
did.
years ago. I think it's great.
The anniversary edition. It's really nice.
There's also a open source project that revived it.
Yep. So, I love that old system. So I think it gets us through tabletop RPGs, and so now we're going to go to the other big news that I saw yesterday, which I think is interesting, and I'd be curious to hear what everybody thinks about. So, Warner Brothers has decided that they are moving up the time that they are putting the new Batman movie, on HBO Max, and that is next Monday.
They were just talking about that pre-stream.
Yep.
We were.
So, once again, it's on our rundown. Is this the new normal?
Yes.
Yep.
Absolutely.
I've seen a lot of criticism from movie people of this move, right? The Batman is still making money. It was number 5 at the box office last weekend, right? So it's still doing okay. Is Warner Brothers leaving money on the table?
No.
Or is this a good move to just move it to HBO Max and see if they can pull a new sub out of it?
A whole new sub, because the people who wanted it's been out for like a month now, maybe.
It'll be 45 days is the window
Yeah.
now.
The people who wanted to see it in theater have probably already seen it in theater, or have plans to do so soon. And for me, I had quite a few friends actually that watched Dune on HBO before they went and saw it in the theater, because they wanted to get that full cinematic experience with that show. And I think the people who want to do that are going to. But I mean, we still live in a world where COVID's a thing. I mean, it still exists.
I think
People are still not.
I think
wanting to
it's
go
the
to
smart
theaters.
move. I think it's the smart move or the right move in the current climate, right? Where I think we're past, unfortunately at the moment we're past the time when, a movie stays in the movie theater for 3 months, trying to eke out as much money as it possibly can before they pull it, and especially given the lack of, I should say, the slow return to movie theaters. If we see a big return at all, it's going to be with tentpole pictures like this, and that you're going to see that return drop off just as quickly again because you have a limited audience that's coming to see these in the theater, and so if it's been 45 days and they think that they've tapped the majority of their market potential for it being in the theater, move it to a different platform and get more people seeing it on, again, get a new sub out of it. When you look at the release windows for Blu-rays now, even like when those release windows, I mean, God,
They're
we can
getting
all
shorter.
remember when it was. Yeah, we can all remember when it was
6 months.
When a year was like, oh my God, we're going to get it within a year, and then all of a sudden it was like we're going to get it within 8 months, and then 6 months, and now we're to the point where it's like, I think last year Black Widow, Black Widow being what it was, it hit the theaters. And then, like, you could buy Black Widow on Blu-ray, I think, within 60 days.
Well,
of it
that was
leaving
one
the
of those
theater.
ones because they pushed it straight to Disney Plus too with the Premier Access.
Yeah, and I think that's the way you're going to see it go in the future because Disney's already tried to do it, and it kind of got some backlash. So I think you're probably going to see major studios coming up with some kind of platform that they're using and start charging like pay-per-view on those.
I still don't understand the backsplash to Disney's Premier Plus, and I will say for
largely because of their marketing.
And I think part of it was their marketing, and the biggest thing I blame it on is they didn't explain that when you played the Premiere Plus, it wasn't a one-time watch. If you paid Premiere Plus, you got access to it as much as you wanted during the theatrical window. And so you just got to keep watching it over and over and over again. And again, I also think that and I don't even know how you market this because I'm not a marketing genius. We'll have to ask Mallo. To me, I kept thinking about it, and I was like, if I take, and because I did it a couple times, I paid the Premiere Plus on Disney Plus for my daughter, and I was like, if me, my wife, and my daughter go to the movie theater, that's $45. $30 to watch it at home is way cheaper.
The general complaint I got was that when Disney Plus really, and you'd have to obviously go look at the fine print, but when they pitched the Disney Plus service, it was a one cost gets you everything we have, and then they're saying that we get you everything you have except these new things. I think that's generally where people got.
I think that's the consumer not being sensitive to the market, because again, Disney Plus came out and then suddenly 6 months later, the world stopped.
Yeah.
And I mean, for these new pictures to release on this streaming service, I mean, I expected to have to pay some kind of movie. If a movie came out, if a movie hit the movie theaters and I wanted to see it on Amazon, I'd expect to have to pay more money to rent it from Amazon.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it's the people that were being vocally complaining about it or were being very vocal about it just weren't being realistic. Like,
I agree. And to go back to what is the theater situation going to be like in the future? Honestly, I think they're still going to exist for a long time because most people don't have a 30,000 square inch screen and movie sound. And I think they're going to shift less from like the mass market stuff we have now to more boutique theaters.
I think you're still going to the mass market, but I think it's going to be limited to the ones that you're like must see in giant screen. Because, and I've made this argument a bunch of times, which is the first movie I saw.
A lot of auteurs are making an argument similar to this, where again, they're saying that with the way the market is changing, with the pandemic effect on theaters, you're only going to really see profits from a larger movie, like hitting it, because that's what people are going to go see. Like that new movie was Everywhere All at Once, right? I think that's the name of it. The new one with Michelle Yeoh.
Yeah.
Everything Everywhere All at Once, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
Like that movie is getting like rave reviews, but it's still a small movie and it's not going to be in theaters for very long. It just won't because and so my argument too is that a lot of those just you don't need to. I'm not getting anything extra. The first movie I saw kind of coming out of the pandemic in the theater was SpiderMan No Way Home. Because I wanted to see that on a big screen and watch them fight on a big screen and things like that.
Dune I saw on the big screen. Those are the only things.
Shang-Chi was my first trip back into the theater
and I waited for that to be on Premiere Plus. I actually paid for that one on Premiere Plus from Disney. I don't think you're going to see When Harry Met Sally in theaters again. And now we've got HBO Max and Apple TV and Netflix and all those other streaming services that are great. They're perfect for those kind of projects. So I still think that you'll see those projects get made. I just don't think you'll ever see them hit a theater again because nobody wants to pay $15. And the experience of seeing that in the theater doesn't really garner you anything extra.
That's why I think we're there. That's why I really think they're going to shift more towards the boutique theaters models because I don't know how big they are like nationwide, but back in Oklahoma we had a theater group called The Warren, and their big claim to fame was that they had an entire upper section of the building and a second story that the only thing that was up there was movie theaters that had really fancy like lazy boy recliners that you sat in, and you could order a steak and booze to be brought to your table.
Well, those places are around
the direction
now.
It's going to go.
Yeah. Well, that's where AMC's going with their like premiere seating, and everybody's going.
The Alamo's been doing that for 10 plus, almost 15 years now. You know?
Yeah, there's a place out in Yakima that does it. The Cinnabar does it.
I don't think we'll ever fully get rid of the major amphitheaters where it's just seats and popcorn, but I think they're going to put more emphasis on giving you a whole experience rather than you just coming in, walking across sticky floors, and eating popcorn.
I think. It's just it's going to be a mass market change for streaming and movie production, though.
Do you think that the theatrical window also? So let's just talk about the big blockbusters. So obviously, Batman's having now the shortest theatrical window that we've seen before it comes free. And here's the thing: this is not an extra thing. You still can't watch. I don't think you can watch No Way Home without paying for it. I don't think it's on any of the free streamers. And by free, I mean just sub only. But Monday, I will be able to.
And that's the
I
thing.
meant to go see Batman, but now I'm just I guess I'll watch it on HBO Max.
But that's the thing. You say free, but it's not free. You pay a monthly subscription to see that movie.
And my thing is the Beyond subscription cost. You still have to pay for it right now. You don't get it. I don't think it's on any of the subscription streaming sites.
I thought it was on HBO.
No.
No, it's not.
SpiderMan's not anywhere.
No Way Home is not on any service at the moment.
Yep.
I have a service it's on.
Yeah.
Also known as piracy. Yeah, I mean, do you think that this is 45 days, that's it? They're just going to go, all right, here's your 45-day window.
Know.
They're going to hit their global market. They're going to get China. They're going to get the Middle East. They're going to get Japan. They're going to get Europe. And then they're going to be like, all right, we're done.
I would be interested to see what the revenue curve looks like on those.
I think Batman made $7 million last week.
But I want to see the bell curve. At what point is it plateauing and then dropping off over time?
I think what you're going to see is the Batman is going to be a test case. And we're going to see a number more test cases before this becomes anything close to reality. I think Warner Brothers is doing this. The industry's going to be paying attention to what happens, because
Warner Brothers will crow. Yep, they'll crow from the rooftops.
Until you see the same thing happen with I hate to say it, with a Marvel flick. If you see a Marvel flick with a 45-day window, then it goes right to streaming. See what the numbers look like then. You're not going to. I think this is a flash in the pan for the moment. This is a test case. I don't think we're looking at the new reality yet.
I'm also very curious to see what kind of licensing agreement they have with HBO to do this.
That's not. They own it.
I know. But
there's no licensing
how's the
agreement.
revenue being shared with the studios and so on and so forth? Because even though they own this one, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to own the next one.
Well, because that's kind of the way that most of the studios are just starting their own streaming services, so they don't have to share revenue anymore.
Yeah.
It's all in-house now, and so Warner Brothers owns HBO Max, Sony owns Crackle, NBC Universal has Peacock. Obviously, Disney has Disney Plus, and this has always been the discussion that Sean and I have had a lot of times about what's going to happen at Netflix in about 5 years when all their, and they've lost a lot of their programming already that they had licensed out. So, I think that the question is will we hear from Warner Brothers big new sub numbers, and then that key metric, which is that first watch, which is what is the first thing a new sub goes to watch? What's the first thing they navigate to? What's the first thing they watch after they get into the service?
Yeah,
And
I'd be interested. We're either going to see those numbers or we're not, or we'll never hear about it.
yeah, if they're good, we're going to hear all about
Yeah,
it.
Warner Brothers will crow till the day is long about how their new DC flick killed it on stream, killed it at the theater, then killed it on streaming, or killed it for bringing in new subs. If it doesn't do what they're expecting, we won't hear a peep. It'll just be something that happened.
Speaking of killing it, Batman just got dethroned for best pre-sale numbers by Doctor Strange 2, The Multiverse of Madness.
Yeah, I'm looking. I mean, I'm on board, man. I'm on board.
This was going to be bananas. This is actually the next one that I actually want to see in theaters, which is Doctor Strange. I'm like, must see this one in theaters because they always do those cool visuals.
Yeah, that's about to say the cosmic nature and the magic nature of the powers. I mean, like the visuals on the trip that you get to go on that big screen with some of those effects is just is next level. It's wonderful. I just want to bring this up real quick because this wasn't in our recap. But what do you guys think about the Stranger Things 4 trailer?
Oh, actually, that's a good question, Joe. Have you seen it?
Nope, I have never. And this is a shameful admission. I have never watched even a single episode.
Oh, you really should watch that.
Oh man, I am just amazed to hear Joe say something was shameful.
I have this issue, and I had it with Game of Thrones as well. The more something is recommended to me, the less likely I am to watch it.
Don't watch Stranger Things; you'll hate it.
I know there's a Demogorgon, but other than that, that's about all I know.
I did see the new trailer. I have watched the first 3 seasons. Actually, was a surprise, like one that my wife actually liked, right? Like she really enjoyed it, which I was surprised about when we watched it because she doesn't normally go for those. I really am happy. Like he didn't die. He's just in Siberia. Obviously, he's going to fight a Demogorgon.
Spoilers.
Like, well, they hinted toward that at the end of the
I know, but I'm
season
just
for those.
I mean, the kids are getting older. The only thing because I think we're going to get a 5th season, and then they said they're done.
Did they? Okay, I wasn't sure if they had signed
I
on for the
think
4th being the last or not.
I think the 5th is supposed to be the last. And here's the thing. This is one of those ones, like, I go the opposite way of Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones should have been 4 seasons longer than it was. This one needs to stop soon because it's going to run out of, like, it's going to start getting repetitive, I think.
I think what I've been saying for a long time about Stranger Things, and I wish more creators would embrace this, is the idea of anthology seasons. I think Stranger Things is a perfect property to do like a season of stories about a group of people, and then the next season is a completely different group of people in the same universe, just with different stories about different things. Like I am the type of viewer that like I like things to end on their own terms. Like I want a good ending. Like give me a good start, a solid middle, and a good end, and I'm happy.
Yeah.
I would rather see a show give me one solid season of storytelling, and then move on to like another story or another group of people or that.
So
type
like
of thing.
True Detective.
Yeah, like True Detective. Or like I am a person that will constantly. I will always say I appreciate a good anthology. Like I appreciate like when a series or when a product or a media presentation gives me a number of sets of stories based in the same universe about different people, and they get to tell different aspects of that universe because they are still so rare nowadays. And I see Tip, you mentioned the Twilight Zone, like that's a good example of an anthology storytelling, but at the same time, like, again, I want to know that these are all happening in the same. Like they don't have to be connected, but they're all happening in the same place.
thing.
Like, so even if in this story they drop like a reference to something that happened in another season that happened somewhere else, like
Stranger Things would be good for that I think I agree. And speaking
I
of
think
the eight, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No,
you
I
go-
was
no, you go.
gonna pivot.
Pivot away.
Speaking of the 80s, we got our final trailer. It only took them 35 years, right? But we're finally getting Top Gun 2. Somehow Pete Mitchell is still in the Navy. Somehow.
I couldn't be less excited about a movie. I honestly, I have
So-
zero.
Is one of those sequels that did not need to be made. No one was asking for it.
No.
I will
And
personally...
I don't support. I don't pay to see anything that Tom Cruise does in the movie
So,
theater anyway.
This has been my rule for the last 15 years. I do not watch Tom Cruise in movies. That being said, okay, there are guilty pleasure movies that I have, right? Transformers, the first Transformers, is one of my guilty pleasure movies. Because sometimes I want to see giant robots and America.
I love
Right?
that
'Cause that's all that
Wait,
movie was.
But don't you want to see giant robots that you can actually make
God.
out like who's fighting
No.
who? Isn't that important to you?
Because this is an argument I have with one of the friends that's been on our Discord lately. He hates the Transformers movies because he
Me too.
calls them cinematic trash. Yes,
are.
They are cinematic trash. But the whole point is it's literally just robots punching each other. Yeah, they get to make robot testicle jokes because it's funny and it's stupid.
I love giant robots fighting each other. I just like to be able to tell, which robot is fighting which robot.
Well, that was the style at the time. But
I'm
I
not.
didn't really mind.
I'm not looking for just a mass of metal thrashing on
Yeah.
the screen. I want to see actual combat.
So-
and that didn't change a whole lot through the trajectory of the series, if I recall.
I
So-
kind of liked it because it kind of made you feel like you were an observer rather than in the middle of the story. And I don't know about you. He's probably the only person that's seen actual combat here that I know of. But
I've never been involved other than the occasional fist fight. I've never been in.
From what I can gather, it's kind of chaotic, and you're not really seeing a whole lot of what's going on.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt like that's what they were going for.
Again, there are certain things that are cinematic trash that I would just watch. Top Gun 2.
Agreed.
I will go see Top Gun 2 because I think it's going to be, because if you go back and watch the original Top Gun, it's melodrama. The dang thing's like a telenovela, okay? It's like he sleeps with his teacher.
Okay.
Like it's all this melodrama that Goose dies and da 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 da. I have this feeling, especially watching the trailers, where I'm like, this is going to be melodrama, dogfighting, melodrama, and I just think it's going to be funny to watch. And again, everything that is old is new again, because apparently we want it to be 1987.
See, this is the kind of movie that I probably would have watched out of morbid curiosity. I would not have paid movie theater prices to go see it. I would have waited till it come out on
Paramount Plus.
something and then.
Oh no! So here's the
watched it.
thing. I'll go this far on record. This is a movie that I would pirate, and I don't pirate anything anymore.
Yeah.
If I intended to see this movie, if I desperately wanted to see it, I'd pirate it because I'm not giving that dude a lick of my money.
I will not watch it because of personal reasons. But my biggest question about it is, in the current political climate and socioeconomic climate or whatever, are we going to see another volleyball scene?
Yes.
Are they going to really ham it up for this one to be
There
woke
will
and
be a
PC?
volleyball scene in this movie. I guarantee it. I will stake money on that.
You watch it and tell me about the quality of the volleyball.
Of the volleyball scene, and whether there's Kenny Loggins playing in the background.
You know they're going to cram that in there somewhere.
Oh yeah.
Oh no! It'll be a weekend cover of a Kenny Loggins song
Oh no, don't do that.
for sure,
Don't
dude.
do
That's
that.
what's gonna it's gonna be a modern artist covering Kenny Loggins. It's
So, I
not
mean-
gonna be Kenny Loggins.
Yeah.
I kind of hope they fully lean into the cheese on it a little bit because that can kind of make some
Again,
of these movies go
melodrama.
from just bad to kind of okay. They're being a little
It's
tongue in
going to
cheek
be
about
super
it.
melodrama. We already know from the trailer that
I-
the one pilot kid, who's one of the pilots that he's at Maverick's training,
Mm-hmm.
is Goose's son, and he obviously is very upset. Because there's a thing in the trailer where he's like, "My father trusted you, I don't." And I was like,
Oh my god!
I want them to fully lean into the cheese and have the
have
pivotal
to.
the pivotal moment, whatever the crux of the is happens.
It will be
It
Russians.
just kind of fades into the Highway to the Danger Zone song, and it just they just go full tongue in the cheek on it. I think that's the only way it's going to be a success.
You know what I want? I want a remake of the movie The Wraith.
Although,
And
go ahead.
you know, no, I that's what if we're gonna remake '80s movies, give me the Wraith. That's what I want.
If they're remaking Top Gun, that means that we may have a possibility open window for the Charlie Sheen spoofs of it.
A Hot Shots remake.
Hot Shots remake.
Hot Shots and Hot Shots Part 2.
Oh my God.
They could
That,
come out
that,
with
that gives you something about the early 90s. They made sequels out of everything. Hot Shots.
And
got-
parody
I've got a
movies
sequel.
were rife. We
Yes.
were rife with parody movies.
I would
Yes.
probably go watch a Hot Shots 3.
Hot Shots Part 2 or Part 3. Well, with those lovely jokes in mind, that's where we're going to leave it for tonight. Thank you all for joining us. We are here live again at Gamers Heaven Seattle. You can come here and grab copies of Identico. You can see Ahsoka, and you will occasionally see this ugly fool up in the shop, right? We have some great stuff to sell you. You can get some boba. I already finished my boba during the stream.
I'm jealous as hell.
See?
I want a boba.
Which,
We have-
if you come in, dragon fruit with the kiwi bubbles. Those
Okay.
are awesome.
There you go.
If you can make one and send it to me tomorrow, I'll drink it on Saturday.
Somehow I don't think it's going to make it to the Midwest, even though it's non-dairy. Come see us tomorrow. We are again running our Identico Living campaign tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific. We will be back next week for Identico After Dark. You can follow us on the YouTube at youtube.com/Identico. You can follow us here at twitch.tv/Identico. And you can see everything else at playidentico.com. Michael, we've heard about the Redemption podcast. You're doing all kinds of stuff. You can also see Michael on Chaos Inc. Right?
Yes, you can
we've
see Matt
got-
Chaos Inc.
which Michael had. If you haven't watched the latest episode, had a wonderful time. Like it is like the TikTok like parkour like meme
yeah.
over and over again. It was great. It was a very
There was
tense
There was
session.
there was a lot of parkour in that last episode.
It
for sure.
worked
A lot of
out.
Parkour fighting.
There was
Yeah, it worked out.
there was a lot of tension as they
And
attempted
if
to
that had been
escape.
our group, we would have rolled a 1 at the very start and fallen off and whatever.
Yep. So Casting will be back in a week and a half, and we will be back next week for Identico After Dark. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
So, Joe, thank you for dropping in, and we will see you all later.
Bye.